Welcome back to Intersection. This is a program of KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Ryan Famulner, and today we're talking about the future of public transportation in Columbia. Joining me in studio is Drew Brooks, the multi-modal manager for the City of Columbia. In that position, he oversees Columbia Transit. And Ian Thomas is a council member for Columbia's 4th Ward. And for you and our audience, for those that use public transit in Columbia, what recommendations do you have? How could the city's bus system improve? Share your thoughts. Give us a call at 573-882-8925 or email intersection@kbia.org. You could also tweet at intersectkbia. So we talked a lot about the Como Connect plan in the first half, and one part we hadn't quite teased out. You did mention it, but we hadn't talked a whole lot about yet. It was the shelters that would go into place.
Correct.
Because there'd be so many transfers in this new system. So,
Sure.
So what's the plan there and the idea and what might actually work here?
So in the current system, we have 26 shelters. As Mr. Thomas mentioned, we are anticipating about 35 transfer points. Well, I'm no mathematician, but those don't add up. So we're going to need a few more shelters because we'd like to have one at every one of those transfer locations. We'd love to have one at every bus stop if we could, but obviously that's not feasible. So we do have some grant funding that we're looking to apply toward that. But we're also hoping to work with some students at the university to actually help us design some different types of shelters this year. So in this semester, I believe that it's going to be taken on as a project that will look at some very efficient ways of designing those. And then over the summer, we'll look at different ways to implement those because we need to get more of those out there. But we want to, there's a variety of things that we want a shelter to do. Right now, the ones that we have are just kind of barely adequate. So we want something that we can provide a lot of information with as well, so that if the technology improves to where we can put the type of signing that would actually display route timing and things like that on there, we'd love to do that. But in the interim, obviously having maps and schedules and all of those things in those shelters is very, very important. Good lighting is very important to us. If we can have solar lighting and things like that, that's at the top of mind. And of course, plenty of access for all of our citizens, including those with disabilities, that can get under the shelters, especially on a day like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Today is kind of a relevant day to talk about that, right? So,
absolutely.
But yeah, because now I guess now they're being used mainly people who are waiting for stops, correct? Where now
That's correct.
The transfers really would make it a different component where people will be kind of exposed more.
Right.
But
I mean,
the payoff is the quicker times.
Yeah,
right?
because our hope is that we'll get these routes timed really, really close, so the person isn't going to have to wait for a lengthy amount of time. But just like with the current system, if your bus that you're transferring to is late because of traffic, it's a football game weekend or an accident, or something happens, we don't want you to have to stand out in the elements if that's the case. We do have a nice warm bus station right now where you can wait. We won't have that necessarily in the future, so we want to come up with some alternatives.
In the city, sorry, Ian, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that the call for a request for more shelters and better shelters is something that I hear a lot as well. When people are just waiting for the bus, not even with the sort of transfer situation. So I think that would be a very popular improvement if we can, allocate funds for better shelters. Drew mentioned the information about the bus coming, and I think one thing that we probably both want to really emphasize, and I think that a lot of people are still not aware of, is that there is now an app that you can get on your smartphone which will show you a map of every Columbia Transit bus route and where the buses are right now. So if you are in a coffee shop, as I was today, with the bus stop kind of across a parking lot, I can look up and look at that app and see when the bus is just about, half a mile away, and that's my timing to run out to the bus stop and be there. I don't have to be standing out so long. That information could be picked up by the bus shelter itself, and you see this in a lot of other cities. And people can just be continually looking at an information board that's telling them that the next 101 South bus is coming in 5 minutes, in 4 minutes, and so on. I think that will improve the bus riding experience a lot for people.
Sure. And I guess one other thing I was going to mention too was the city did apply for a grant, I think a federal grant for this, and unfortunately didn't get it.
Yes.
So what's the idea now? What other grants are we going to apply for this?
Well, we are always applying for grants. They have dried up a little bit. There's not quite as many as there used to be. And for many years we would get earmarks, but as we all know, that's kind of dried up a little bit as well. So any grant opportunities, we're definitely applying for those. But I think what we're going to end up having to do is expend more local dollars on things like this. We won't be able to wait for a federal grant to necessarily do all of these type of things, especially when it comes to shelters. We're still going to have to do that when it comes to buses because the buses are extremely expensive, almost $500,000 per bus. But for shelters and things like that, I think we're going to have to start looking at expending local dollars for those type of things because I think they're needed improvements that we really need to do.
Another thing to move on to, we talked earlier about how ridership and fares aren't going to pay alone for the system, but at the same time, ridership's important, right?
That's right.
So what are some of our goals for ridership, and what do you think are the realistic goals here in Columbia?
Well, in 2010, we did, at the time, what we thought was a pretty major revision of the routes. It's nothing compared to what we're doing today. And we saw about a 13% increase in ridership. We expanded to some areas that we'd never been to before. With Como Connect, with this project, we're dramatically expanding into areas that we've never been to before, getting all the way out to Lake of the Woods, to Scott Boulevard, two areas that have probably been two of our biggest requests for 10 years, probably. And so I would anticipate that we'll see at least a similar growth rate, but I would think probably even more because I think that this system, the way we're designing it, is going to be accessible to people who maybe don't necessarily need public transportation, but they can make a choice now to use it because the frequencies will be better. The buses will be, shorter wait times, shorter total overall trip times. So I think that we'll see people who will start to use it because they can actually make the choice to use it. Whereas right now it's a very inconvenient choice. You really only use it if you have to use it, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's really about it. And my ward, the 4th ward, is perhaps the worst served ward of all 6 in terms of public transit services. And yet I hear from a lot of people who do own cars and use their cars for almost all their journeys that, if the bus system were more frequent, if it came closer to where they lived, if it was convenient and would drop them off close to where they want to go, then they would absolutely use it. It would avoid the hassle of parking, the hassle of driving. A lot of people in my ward have strong environmental philosophies, and riding the bus is a way to reduce our total carbon emissions. And people see it actually as a quality of life issue to be on the bus system and without all of the stress of driving. So I'm very hopeful that when that light green route, I think it is, comes down in the southwest corner of town, Scott Boulevard and Forum, that'll be a very well used route, and I'll certainly be making sure that my constituents are aware of it.
Right. I guess too, if we do branch out into new areas, really, Transit is going to have to make a big effort in promotion here as well,
That's right?
And
That's
so,
right.
what are some of the ideas we have there?
Well, we have a marketing specialist for the first time ever, and we actually have a marketing budget this year for the first time ever. So we actually are looking at a variety of different ways of reaching out. I know that our social media presence is something that we've been pushing incredibly aggressively over the last couple of years. But we're going to have to do some more conventional type things, whether it's radio or print or different things to really get the word out there. It may involve just things like door hangers and things in those neighborhoods where we're going to be now, because we really want to get that word out. We don't want people to be surprised when a route moves that they might be using right now. And we also would love for them to know when that route's going to get there when the new ones arrive.
Right. And again, tying into that digital space may address some of that as well.
Absolutely.
Right. And so, I guess too, again, Ian, we talked about this earlier, but I mean, we just keep coming back to the idea of, it's just an option at this point.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a very good option for some people, but really what many people would like to see is something that is the first choice, right? The culture of car ownership is not necessarily, where your mind goes immediately. Yeah,
right.
Exactly. Which for many people, as you said in your ward, that's kind of the case, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, you can sort of estimate some criteria at which a lot of people would make that other choice. If the nearest bus stop is a 5-minute walk away, if they know when they get there that even if they've just missed a bus, there's another one coming in about 15 or 20 minutes, if it's going to drop them off within a 5-minute walk of where they want to end up, if the bus is going to run till, 9, 10 o'clock in the evening, if there's going to be 7 days a week service. I think that if we can get the funding to the level that we can provide that service, we will see an enormous increase in usage. Right now, with the low frequency and the particularly in southwest and southern parts of town, relatively low density of the bus routes, people aren't even considering it as an option. They think that the car is the only option. But Como Connect will start to address that. I think we can leverage some new funding ideas to make some small expansions in the near term, and then look for a major new funding source to get us to that level, which I think we need to double or treble the operating budget.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you mentioned earlier the public health aspect of this as well. I mean, in your work at PedNet, there was a health impact study that was done there. Talk a little about that.
Well, sure. In general terms, if you look at national statistics, communities that have a good public transit system and one where a high percentage of the residents use the public transit system, a much higher percentage of the residents get the CDC recommended level of physical activity every day of about 20 to 30 minutes walking or more vigorous activity every day. In other areas where the automobile is the primary mode of transportation, people fail to get that because there are not any other opportunities in their sort of lifestyles to get that physical activity. There's other good research that shows that trying to get your physical activity levels up by joining a gym or by doing special extra things, going for a jog and going for a bicycle ride as an exercise activity are not very successful. But once you build physical activity into your routine, because you always do that quarter of a mile walk to the bus stop morning and afternoon, and then maybe a little walking at the other end, builds it in and people don't even notice it. So people have better health where you have good public transit.
And to that point too, we just met with some physicians and administrators with the university health system, and what they've tell us is that one of the greatest barriers, and this is nationwide, the greatest barriers to getting to a healthcare appointment is transportation. That reliable transportation is just incredibly a barrier when it comes to it. If the bus is not on time and you miss your appointment, then you're kind of out of luck. So we really looked at that health impact assessment when we started designing these routes, looking at health care facilities and where they're located and making sure that all of those are on routes.
I want to take a moment to remind our audience that this is Intersection, a program of KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Ryan Famuliner, and today we're talking about the future of public transportation in Columbia. Joining me in studio are Drew Brooks, the multi-modal manager for the City of Columbia. In that position, he oversees Columbia Transit, and Ian Thomas is a council member for Columbia's 4th Ward. And for you and our audience, let us know what you think about this issue today by giving us a call at 573-882-8925 or email intersection@kbia.org. You could also tweet us at intersectkbia. Another big thing that's coming through the pipes here, we talked a lot about Como Connect, but there's also this Columbia Area Transportation Study Organization. Ian, maybe tell me a little about that. And how that fits into kind of this long-term plan here for the area.
Sure. The Columbia Area Transportation Study Organization, or CATSO, is our sort of federally defined metropolitan planning area. There's a committee which includes representatives from the city, the county, and the state, MoDOT specifically, both elected and senior appointed officials, that develops a long-range plan for using federal dollars and combining those with local dollars for transportation purposes. Every 5 years, that long-range plan is required to be updated, and we're actually going through that process right now. So I would encourage everybody who's got an interest in the future of transportation in Columbia to go to the City of Columbia website, to type CATSO Long-Range Transportation Plan into the search field, and that should take you pretty quickly to this update. There is a survey at that website where people can express their preferences for how Columbia should be developing its transportation system using federal and local dollars. And that survey is open till January the 27th, I believe. and we're expecting that the CATSO Coordinating Committee will formally adopt the latest update at its meeting on February the 22nd. I would like to just reference some of the goals and objectives that are in that update. This is a 100-plus page document.
So yeah, we don't have time for the whole thing.
But don't have time for the whole thing, but the goals and objectives are really very, very telling. As far as the plan update references streets and highways, there's a very strong focus on maintaining the system that we have right now, fixing the potholes, keeping the traffic moving, but very little emphasis, if any at all, on expanding that highway system, because people recognize that's extremely expensive with purchase of right-of-way and not having the space to add lanes and so on. So I think we're going to see much less of that sort of highway expansion. But there's an enormous focus on other modes of transportation. Objectives like improve and expand infrastructure for pedestrians, bicyclists, and people with disabilities, expand and redesign the existing transit system, support and promote public transportation in the city, identify and address the needs of minority and low-income populations and those who do not own a car, reduce reliance on the automobile. I'm just reading from some of these goals and objectives. So I'm very encouraged that with a plan like this, which the planning department or the community development department has put together after listening to community input. One other plan that they relied on heavily, which reflects all of these values, is the Columbia Imagined Comprehensive Plan, which the council adopted a couple of months ago, which again shows a very firm focus on transit and walking and bicycling where that's a reasonable option, to develop those modes of transportation rather than assume that everybody will complete every journey by car. With these goals and objectives in here, with this being tied to the allocation of federal and local funding resources, I'm very confident in the long term we will see more funding going into the transit system and less focus on large highway expansions, intersection expansions, and so on.
Mm-hmm. And so, but at the same time, communities all around the country are going to be competing for this money as well, right? From states and from the federal government too. So that seems, how difficult is this going to be to get those funds? All the conversations we're having today always come back to funding, right?
Sure.
And so how difficult is that going to be, do you think?
Well, I think that most of these funds are on a formula basis. So based on our population, based on our distribution, we receive certain allocations from the federal government. Now, of course, the future of federal funding is also, there are questions about it because the Federal Highway Gas Tax Trust Fund is shelling out a lot more money than it's taking in. There are conversations about how to fund transportation. There's little political appetite for increasing either the federal or the state gas tax. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that says to me is that if the funding is coming from other sources, such as property taxes, sales taxes, utility fees, rather than the gas tax, then all the more reason to be able to put a higher proportion into non-automobile modes.
Okay. And so I guess, Drew, too, on CATSO, what have you seen in that process as well, and what kind of highlights are there for you?
Sure. Well, I sit on the technical board of CATSO, and so we look at this very, very closely, and our input is vital. In fact, it's required that the FDA and the federal government requires that transit have a very active role in that. So from the top down, there's a lot of requirement that there's transit involvement. We're looking at this as a stepping off point for a master plan that we're hoping to develop over the next couple of years. We hope that after we're done with the Como Connect implementation, that we'll then start working on a full-blown master plan, because we really haven't had one that we've been updated in several years. So I think that now is the time to really look at that and look at what the future of transportation and public transportation specifically in Columbia is.
And I think going back to some of the statistics I mentioned at the beginning of the program about peak car happening in 2005, mm-hmm. and young people in particular starting driving, owning their first car at much later ages, using public transit and bicycling for essential journeys at much higher rates than ever before, all points to sort of the future direction that people are going to go. And there's no reason to think Columbia is going to be any different from other, towns and cities. One of the things that I think is becoming increasingly apparent to people is the high cost of owning and operating a car. And the average car owner in the United States spends $9,000 a year simply to own and operate that car. Part of that is the depreciation in the value of the car, and the rest goes in the operating expenses, from maintenance and repairs to gas to tax and insurance and so on. If a two-car family can downsize to a one-car family, because we've got a good bus system, we already do have a really good system of bike lanes and trails, so that biking is a much better option and a much more utilized option now compared with 10 years ago. Maybe a tripling in the number of bicycle journeys people are doing as counted at typical locations. Then a two-car family can really save $9,000 a year and just have one car, and maybe be a little more flexible in how they manage all of their transportation resources. That's $9,000 that people can spend on other priorities, and possibly including paying an additional sales tax or something that helps fund the excellent public transit system.
Sure. We actually have a caller on the line I wanted to bring in, Ruth from New Bloomfield. Ruth, are you there?
I am here.
Hi, yeah, thanks for calling in today.
You're welcome.
So what did you want to talk about today?
I think I missed the window to bring this up, perhaps, but I
sure.
wanted to mention that I want to speak up for having some sort of. I know the plan is to do away with the Wabash Station as a hub, but and that's fine. I think that I like the plans that we've talked about. I would like to speak up for having some sort of central place that would be accessible by several bus routes to do customer service, to have a warm or cool place to wait, for example, I live in New Bloomfield, which is 20-something miles away, and obviously I have to drive to Columbia, but when I get there, I can park my car and take the bus all around town, and I do that. So I appreciate having a central place, okay?
Sure.
So that's what I'm saying.
Sure. No, yeah, Ruth, thanks. You didn't miss the window. We'll talk about it. Thanks for the
Fair
call.
enough. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Well, when we keep talking about the Wabash Station going away, well, it's not going anywhere. It's just not going to be the central hub. We anticipate that at least probably this downtown route will interface with that station. It will continue to be our operations center for the time being. It was a federally funded project, and we're required to have some sort of transportation usage for 20 years, and that project was completed in 2007. So we have to have some usage for it for transportation. So we'll continue to use it for the foreseeable future for some sort of transportation purposes.
Sure. And yeah, I guess again, retaining that older method is maybe important too, even though a lot of digital space can replace a lot of these things.
That's right.
But there are going to be a lot of users that aren't as digitally inclined.
That's
right?
correct.
So,
That's correct. So we're going to have to use all technologies, whether they're old or new, to make sure that we're communicating to everyone.
Sure. And so again, the idea of her, I guess, also commuting in to use. I mean, really, that's something we're talking about. We would like to see more of it. You both kind of almost seemed surprised when she said that.
Yeah.
But like that idea, is that something we're also keeping in mind? Is, I mean, it seems like a lot of times we're talking about people that already live in Columbia and are trying to get from home to work, things like that. But there are other populations too, I guess.
Yeah, and I think long term that we'll have to start looking at more regional transportation. I think there's definitely a desire to have more connections with other communities, whether it be with Jefferson City or Centralia or Boonville. There's already a private provider who's basically doing a commuter service between Columbia and Jefferson City. So I think that we'll start to see as we kind of move out in the next few years that we'll start looking at a more regional plan for transportation. We've been really focused on the city for a long time, and that's our goal, obviously, as members of the city. But I think overall that we'll start to see some expansion into more regional type transportation.
Kind of what I'm hearing is we kind of need to get things here figured
That's
out
right.
first, right?
That's right. That's right. Absolutely.
Because I mean, again, especially with the neighborhoods and the growth outside of town. I mean,
Right.
the system we were using before, as you mentioned early on in the
Yeah.
show, ridership was down. I mean, we had some issues.
That's right. And I mean, the city is now, I think, 64 square miles or something like that. That's and our population density is quite low. So, getting to the population within the city is actually quite an endeavor. We have to actually use some miles to get to those areas. Yeah.
Yeah. Thinking of Ruth's habit of driving into town and then using the bus to get around, which I think makes a lot of sense, particularly if she doesn't like city traffic or that kind of thing. Reminds me of the fact that there's a tremendous number of people who work in the downtown area for the city and for private businesses who live outside city limits. And we do have some kind of park and ride initiatives, but I think that is a growing opportunity, especially as parking in the downtown area is, a big problem, something that local businesses that require customer traffic, such as restaurants and shops and so on, are very aware of, very concerned that it's difficult for their customers to find somewhere to park, and that affects their business, and it affects how many people come downtown to shop and eat and recreate and so on. One thing that Drew and I have discussed that I'm hopeful will continue to grow as an idea is encouraging, through sort of discounts and so on, downtown employees to use the bus to get in, whether they live in the outskirts of Columbia or if they live out of town, to drive and use the bus to come down and keep those parking spaces free for the customers who've just come downtown for sort of a short time. We've spent an enormous amount of money on public parking structures over the last several years, and we really don't want to spend any more. I think if we're putting more money into downtown transportation resources, we want to be improving the bus system so that we're using our valuable downtown space much more efficiently than bringing in cars and storing thousands of cars.
We only have a couple minutes in the show left, but I guess one thing we didn't actually spell out here is what the timeline is going to be like on a lot of the things we've talked about today. So maybe specifically for Como Connect, Drew, what's the timeline here?
Right. So we've spent the last 6 or so months since May of last year, a little longer than that now, trying to get the word out to the public. We've done meetings in the wards. I think I've myself conducted 30 or 40 meetings myself, trying to get the word out. And our hope is then we were going to present all of our findings, the survey information, to council in February. We'll have 2 public hearings at the meetings in February. And then we would hope that at the second meeting that council would give us the green light to proceed with the project. Then the real heavy lifting will begin, where we're literally moving shelters and signs and teaching everybody the system and printing new maps and all of that type of stuff. Our goal is to have it fully implemented by August 4th of this year. And we'd like to maybe start doing some phase-in in July, where we could kind of phase in some of the new routes along with the old, so people could have a cushion there to learn. But right now, the most pressing need is we want to keep getting feedback. If you go to comoconnect.org, we have our surveys up through Friday, and we'd love to get feedback there. There's a really good video up that you can watch. It's about 7 minutes that explains the entire system of what we're trying to do. And there's maps and all of the resources you need there, so you can take a look at those and take the surveys. We'd really like your feedback.
Okay. Well, that's actually all the time we have for today's intersection. Thanks very much to our guests, Drew Brooks, the multi-modal manager for the City of Columbia, and Ian Thomas, a council member for Columbia's 4th Ward. We'd like to remind those of you enjoying this as a rebroadcast that Intersection takes place live for a full hour from 2 to 3 every Monday afternoon. You can watch live streaming video of our program each Monday afternoon online at kbia.org. Alongside that video, you can submit your questions and comments and take part in an online discussion with others in the audience. You'll also find an archive of all of our past programs, including the full hour of today's conversation. Intersection is a broadcast from the Reynolds Journalism Institute and is a project of RJI and KBIA. Intersection is produced by Raymond Tungakar, Janet Saidi, and Ruben Stern. Travis McMillan is our technical director with production assistance from Caleb Hoke. Pat Akers is our audio producer. Executive directors are Mike Dunn and Mike McKean. And I'm Ryan Famuliner. Thanks for joining us today, and have a great week.